Good day, everyone, and this is Chapter 5, Lesson 1 of the Assessment and Learning, entitled Construction of Written Tests. So, for the discussion, we have the structure. We have first the written test. What is written test? Next is the prerequisites, the classroom assessments, the authentic / performance-based assessment, and last is the general guidelines in choosing the appropriate test formats. Before anything else, I am Raymark V. De La Iras, a graduate of General Academic Strand in Sorsogon National High School and currently taking Bachelor of Secondary Education major in Social Studies in Bicol University Gubat Campus. So, what is written test? So, what written test is? Written test is a test or a written examination. It is also a technique to assess students' knowledge, skills, or abilities. These are tests that are usually divided into several parts, each cover a different area of the field to be tested. So these are usually the examinations presided by the teachers in a classroom basis. But during this pandemic, we are about to use technology. Through the aid of the technology, we are about to make use of this technology to provide a written examination through Google Documents as a venue for this examination. So those written tests are required in order to assess the knowledge, the skills, and of course, to what extent does the learners was being achieved to. Moving on to the prerequisites of the lesson, we have first is that it requires specific skills and experience. Of course, you have to attain these qualities, these skills and experiences in order to craft a well-formed and framed construction of this written test. Next is that you should be able to distinguish the different types and formats and understand the processes and requirements in setting learning objectives and outcomes. And lastly, you must adhere in preparing the table of specifications. So this table of specifications became the guide of the teachers when they are going to assess the learnings through the scoring and rubrics from the written tests. Now we are down to what is classroom assessments. So classroom assessments is seen as an integral part of learners' learning. They do more than just measure learning. It is a way to inform the learners what needs to be learned and to what extent and how to learn them. It also provides the parents some feedback about their child's achievement of the desired learning outcomes, or the so-called DLOs. So these desired learning outcomes is those set specific objectives, or what does the teacher to be expect from the students themselves. The school is having benefits from it in a sense that from those classroom assessments, learners' test results provide them evidence-based data assessments because learners' test results are useful, and these data are useful for instructional planning and decision making. As such, it is very important, it is very relevant to that those assessment tasks or tests are meaningful and further promote deep learning, as well as to fulfill the criteria and principles of test constructions. So this classroom assessment being conducted every after the lesson, every after the discussion, became very important because this is very vital in the learners as well as to the teachers. Because through these classroom assessments, the teachers are able to know if what does the children have learned, does the DLO or the desired learning outcomes and expectations have been achieved all throughout the discussion. And lastly is that it was able to measure the learnings of the students and as well as It provides feedback to the parents if their children or their child was able to learn that once they've entered and exit the four corners of the classroom, they gain knowledge, they gain new information, they gain new ideas. Next is the authentic/performance-based assessments. This type of assessment have been advocated as better and more appropriate methods in assessing learning outcomes, particularly as they assess higher level thinking skills. So when we speak of the higher level thinking skills, this is about the cognitive thinking of the learner. So dito pumapasok yung ini-evaluate, ina-analyze ng bata through remembering, through careful judgments. Ginagamit na po kasi ito. This is what we call the higher level thinking skills. The traditional written assessment methods such as, when we say traditional, we are going to go back to the old times wherein mostly elementary levels and junior high school levels lang yung kadalasan gumagamit nito. In some way, this is the multiple choice test examinations, in which this is also considered as the appropriate and efficient classroom assessment tools for some types of learning targets. So these learning targets are also based on the desired learning outcomes of the discussion. So yung desired learning outcomes natin, this is the expectations, this is the compass, this is the guide of the teachers, whether the learners was able to achieve those learnings that they should be once they exit the four corners of classroom. Excuse me. So therefore, through these multiple choice test examinations, you only have to choose the best answer. Therefore, yung ginagawa ko noon is, we have the four choices. The A, B, C, and then T. Therefore, yung ginagawa ko noon is, I eliminate these options one by one and choose the best one. So actually, it helps me a lot, especially when all of those options are correct for me. Kasi sometimes tumutugma sila lahat. Pero looking and evaluating at the question itself, there is a loophole na makikita tayo doon wherein may mas suitable and possible answer. So, let's eradicate na kapag wala tayong nakitang parang tamang sagot doon, yung kadalasan ginagawa natin is we choose the option D, wherein sometimes nilalagay nila is none of the above or all of the above. So, let's avoid that kind of mentality kasi minsan, it is not helpful. So sometimes, some circumstances, given circumstances, is that tama naman na minsan the question pertains to none of the above or sometimes all of the above. But there is only one possible options wherein minsan wala sa none of the above and wala sa all of the above. That when we are about to make and choose of the appropriate test format for a written examination, we also have these general guidelines or the general protocols that we ought to follow. So this is somewhat like, kumbaga sa ating research papers, this is supposedly the statement of the problems wherein ito yung magiging compass natin in making and choosing the appropriate test format. So first is, what are the objectives or desired learning outcomes of the subject unit lesson being assessed? So this depends on the learning objectives or the desired learning outcomes of the subject unit and lesson. Desired learning outcomes or the DLOs are statements of what learners are expected to do or demonstrate as a result of engaging in the learning process. So therefore, before you create and choose the appropriate test format, you have to be able to identify and understand what the desired learning outcomes of the subject unit lesson. Of course, you won't be making any written examination to assess the learning if you don't have this DLO. It is very useless. That's why, first and foremost, is you have to set those prior objectives of the lesson. Kasi yun yung magsisilbi mong batayan, yun yung magsisilbing guide mo para makapili ka ng best test format na angkop or suitable para sa pag-assess ng learning progress ng mga bata. Next is number 2, what level of thinking is to be assessed? It is remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating. Thus, the cognitive level of the test question match your instructional objectives or DLO or the desired learning outcomes. So when we talk of the cognitive level, we pertains to the higher thinking skills kasi ini-involve naman yung cognitive thinking ng learners natin. So your test question should always match to the objectives or the DLOs. So like what I've said kanina, it should be aligned with the DLO. All of the written examinations should be aligned with the DLO. So it says here that level of thinking to be assessed is also an important factor to consider when designing your test, as this is the guide. Remember the word, it is the guide in choosing the appropriate test format. So let's say, for example, you intend to assess how much your learners are able to identify important concept discussed in class. So the best here, the best strategy is to remembering or understanding level. So a selected response format such as the multiple choice test would be appropriate. Kasi you only have to input in the question some context clues from the concepts itself. So kung maaalala ng mga bata yung keyword or context clue na nilagay mo doon sa concept ng question, therefore they are able to identify from the multiple choices na binigay mo. They are able to remember and understand. So that is the cognitive level. It includes, or it is an inclusion of the cognitive level wherein they are able to choose the best option. And a selected response format, however, okay, if you intend to assess how your students will be able to explain and apply in another setting a concept or framework learned in class, they are making use of the applying and analyzing level. You may consider giving constructed response test formats such as essays. So this is very evident when you are able to make a reflection and then reaction papers. So yun yung part ng written examination ng mga bata na kung saan you are able to give them a certain situation, a status quo, such as this pandemic that we are experiencing right now. You are able to ask the student, how would you feel? Or what could be the importance of following the health protocols mandated by the IATF and the government? Or as a youth member, how can you contribute in, let's say, in having the cases of this COVID-19 decrease? So therefore, the best written test for that, the best written examination for that, to assess the learning of those students is through those essay. So sa pamamagitan ng pagsusulat ng isang essay or sanaysay sa Tagalog, doon natin ma-assess kung papaano nga ba or ano nga ba yung magiging contribution nila para mapababa yung kaso ng COVID-19. Therefore, yung desired learning outcomes natin should always be our topmost priority when we are about to give those written examinations to our students. Kasi sila yung magiging batayan nga po natin. 3 is all about matching or aligning. So the question is, in guidelines in choosing the appropriate test format is the test match or aligned with the course's desired learning outcomes and the course contents or learning activities? So the assessment task should be aligned with the instructional activities and the DLOs. Thus, it is important that you are clear about what DLOs are to be addressed by your test and what the course activities or tasks are to be implemented to achieve the DLOs. So yung test na ibibigay natin, yung written examination as stated here, should be always aligned with the course and as well as the specific objectives and DLOs expected from the learners. Kasi kung yung DLO mo is in a good state or parang talagang akma doon sa concept or sa lesson na ginawa mo, na diniscuss mo. But, yung question mo is napakalayo yung binigay mong written examination. I affirm that your assessment is not valuable. It is not valuable. It is not significant. It is not relevant. Hindi mo mapapakinabangan yung evidence or yung data mo once na yung binigay mong written examination is not aligned with the DLO. It is very useless naman talaga. Kasi, how are you able to make your accomplishment report if yung result ng examination is very far from that DLO mo na sinet mo? For example, sinet mo na at the end of the lesson, the students should be able to demonstrate sign language, but the students was not able to demonstrate the sign language. Instead, what you have done is through drawing or through arts. How could that be possible? Kasi kung magsa-sign language ka, you are making use of these movements. You are making use of gestures. How are you able to assess that the learners are able to demonstrate? Of course, it should be in action. It should be in through practicum or parang actual na isasagawa ng student para mas ma-assess mo yung learning ng mga bata. And for the last guidelines in choosing the appropriate test format in designing your written examination is the question that are the test items realistic to the students? So when we say realistic, it should be experienced by the children. It should be meaningful to the life of the students. So test items should be meaningful and realistic to the learners. They should be relevant or related to their everyday experiences. The use of concepts, terms, or situations that have not been discussed in the class or that they have never been encountered, read, or heard about should be minimized or avoided. So why it should be minimized or avoided? Kasi when the child is, or when the student instead is not familiar or not, parang na-encounter niya is new word, what will that be? Ano yung magiging resulta? The child or the learner will be curious of it. It is very, very important to minimize this kind of activity wherein using concept terms or situations na parang hindi naman akma sa pag-iisip nila at hindi akma sa edad nila. That's why in communication, you always have to consider your audience, particularly the culture, the age, and several factors. Kasi hindi naman tayo lahat magkakatulad. We all have these so-called differences. And all we have to do is to respect that, and we always have to consider them. So this is to prevent the learners from making wild guesses which will undermine your measurement of what they have really learned from the class. Kasi when you keep on using those concepts, when you are making use of those words na hindi pa naman na-encounter ng mga bata at their early age, that would trigger their curiosity and was able to question wherein sabi nga nila, yung mga batang matanungin daw is matalino. Yes, in some sense. But sometimes it is not kasi it leads them to their curiosity. And sometimes that curiosity leads them to doing something that is not good at their age. So, thank you very much. That is the end of my discussion, and I am hoping that in this Chapter 5, Lesson 1, Construction of Written Test, you are able to gain knowledge and information from it. If you have questions, queries, suggestions, recommendations, or violent reactions, feel free to reach me through my Facebook account, Raymark Delendo de los Iras, or message me at my Gmail account, that is delendo-raymark-08@gmail.com. Thank you very much, and thank you for listening.